They were the icons of cinema's most glamorous era, faces so flawless they seemed carved by gods. But behind the silver screen, many of Hollywood's biggest stars were hiding painful secrets, deformities, disabilities, hidden not just from the public, but often from their own co-stars. This isn't just about what they endured, but why they had to. Here are 20 Golden Age legends who secretly fought battles no camera ever captured. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, had a charm so potent it made the nation swoon. But few knew the truth behind that iconic grin. It was completely manufactured. By his early 30s, Gable suffered from severe periodontal disease, losing all his teeth and replacing them with full dentures. These ill-fitting dentures weren't just uncomfortable, they were torturous. Gable's mouth frequently bled and ulcerated, making it painful to speak, eat, or even smile. To maintain his image, he developed a habit of covering his mouth when laughing, a gesture misread as modesty. His chronic halitosis became so unbearable that co-stars like Joan Crawford dabbed peppermint oil under their noses to endure romantic scenes. Behind the scenes, directors filmed his close-ups using a stand-in from behind, limiting Gable's screen time with the dentures. The psychological toll was immense. Despite being the symbol of masculine perfection, Gable reportedly feared eating in public or kissing his wives in private. His dazzling presence on screen masked a painful truth. His greatest trademark was a carefully guarded illusion. And for the studios, protecting that illusion was worth more than his comfort. Because in old Hollywood, perfection was profit, and Gable's suffering was just another production cost. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was every man's dream, an exotic beauty with unmatched elegance. But the face that lit up cinema screens was the result of brutal, studio-engineered transformation. Born Margarita Cancino, Hayworth was deemed too ethnic for American stardom. So Columbia Pictures orchestrated a horrifying makeover, starting with her hairline. Using weekly electrolysis sessions without anesthesia, the studio raised her hairline over an inch. For more than a year, she sat silently as her scalp was burned inch by inch, blood soaking into towels she bit down onto muffled screams. The goal? To erase her Spanish identity. Hayworth also had uneven leg lengths, requiring custom-built orthopedic shoes. Every elegant step she took on screen came at the cost of chronic hip pain. Yet no studio press release ever mentioned this. Instead, she was dubbed the Love Goddess, a persona so far removed from her true self that it tormented her. She was trained to deny her heritage and lie about her background. They said no one would want a Spanish girl, she later told her daughter. Her transformation, both physical and psychological, wasn't cosmetic, it was erasure. Rita Hayworth wasn't born in Hollywood. She was built in pain by a system that believed beauty had only one blueprint, and diversity had to be burned away. James Dean. James Dean's squinting, reactive acting style made him a generational icon. But what looked like rebellious cool was, in truth, the result of two hidden disabilities. Dean was severely nearsighted and partially deaf, conditions he concealed to avoid being labeled unfit for leading roles. He couldn't see beyond a few feet without glasses and was forbidden to wear them on camera. Instead, directors had to position him manually before each take. To make matters worse, his partial hearing loss, likely due to childhood illness, meant he often missed cues and misunderstood lines. His delayed reactions on screen were interpreted as genius. But off camera, they led to accusations of being difficult and uncooperative. Dean once confided to Dennis Hopper, "I'm not trying to be mysterious. I just can't hear half of what they're saying." These impairments, unspoken by studios and unknown to fans, shaped his performances into something unintentionally unique. That iconic squint wasn't an affectation, it was survival. His alienated screen presence wasn't just character, it was real isolation. Tragically, Dean died before he could reveal how hard he'd worked to hide his vulnerabilities. The world saw a rebel without a cause, but what they missed was a young man trying desperately to connect, while locked in a world of blurred shapes and half-heard voices. Mel Oberon. Mel Oberon dazzled audiences with her porcelain features and ethereal charm, But her beauty hid more than just movie magic. Behind the soft lighting and flawless makeup was a woman battling both facial paralysis and the shame imposed by Hollywood's racism. A horrific 1937 car crash left one side of Oberon's face paralyzed and deeply scarred. Her cinematographer husband, Lucian Ballard, invented a new lighting rig, the Obi light, to conceal the damage. Every scene had to be lit just so, every angle carefully chosen. Makeup artists would discreetly wipe drool from her numb cheek between takes. But Oberon's deepest concealment wasn't physical, it was cultural. Born in India to an Anglo-Indian mother, she lied about her heritage for decades. Studio executives feared her background would end her career. So she fabricated a Tasmanian origin story, even rejecting her Indian relatives publicly when they tried to reconnect. The emotional trauma of hiding who she was, and who she no longer physically felt herself to be, haunted her for life. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed to a friend late in life. The woman who looked so perfect on screen was fighting a double invisibility, the scars on her face and the blood in her veins. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi's chilling portrayal of Count Dracula captivated audiences, but the haunting movements weren't just acting. Lugosi had severe sciatica from a World War I injury that left him partially disabled. His stiff-legged walk and rigid posture weren't character choices, they were necessities. Every scene was filmed under intense pain. He couldn't stand for long and needed assistance between takes. Morphine became a daily necessity, not only to dull his physical agony, but also to keep him functional on set. He was also legally blind without thick glasses he couldn't wear on camera. That infamous Dracula stare, it came from trying desperately to focus on shapes he couldn't clearly see, and his Hungarian accent, often imitated, was partly the result of a wartime brain injury that affected his speech processing. Yet Universal Studios never acknowledged his disabilities. They spun his limitations into legend. The limp became the vampire's glide. The stiffness became eerie control. The reality? Lugosi was working through pain that would have stopped most people from standing, let alone acting. And still, he delivered a performance that defined a genre. Dracula was a monster, but the man behind the cape was a hero, silently battling demons far more terrifying than any ever shown on screen. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn was Hollywood royalty, intelligent, independent, and famously unbothered by convention. But behind her bold persona was a condition she hid for decades, essential tremor, a progressive neurological disorder that caused her head and hands to shake uncontrollably. The tremors began in her early 30s, just as her career was peaking. Studios, quick to label anything abnormal as a threat to box office appeal, dismissed it as nerves. Hepburn knew the truth, and she fought to conceal it. She pioneered fashion choices that became her trademark: high collars, neck scarves, and long sleeves, all designed to stabilize or obscure her trembling limbs. She added pockets to dresses so she could hide shaking hands. Her rapid, clipped speaking style wasn't just a character choice, it was a way to mask vocal shakiness. Directors like George Cukor adjusted scenes to accommodate her movements, but few beyond her closest circle ever knew. Her independence was often interpreted as arrogance. In reality, it was strategy. Avoid dinner parties, turn down interviews, control every angle so no one would notice. Despite her fears, Hepburn built one of the longest and most acclaimed careers in film history. Her determination to work through her condition in silence became a form of defiance. The woman who couldn't be tamed was actually fighting for the right to be seen without being judged. To Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney was the epitome of elegance and mystery in 1940s Hollywood. But behind those hypnotic eyes was a condition she dared not speak of: severe color blindness. In an industry where color meant everything, red dresses, green screens, costume coordination, Tierney couldn't distinguish red from green at all. She memorized costume locations and used fabric textures to recognize wardrobe changes. Directors had to place her carefully in scenes, avoiding red props or backgrounds that could confuse her on camera. Her condition caused deep anxiety. During the filming of Leave Her to Heaven, her character was supposed to spot a red boat in a critical scene, but Tierney couldn't find it because she couldn't see it. The scene had to be reshot after the crew discreetly realized the problem. Tierney also suffered from bipolar disorder, which was poorly understood at the time. She endured grueling vitamin shots that were, in fact, unregulated amphetamines and barbiturates, administered to keep her functional. These treatments eventually led to institutionalization and electroconvulsive therapy, which affected her memory and cognitive abilities. When she returned to acting, she had to rely on cue cards, but no one outside the studio system knew. The press praised her stillness and ethereal presence, never realizing it masked a storm of neurological confusion and emotional fragility. Tierney's beauty was real, but her control was an illusion, painstakingly crafted in a world where admitting disability was career suicide. Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd was known for jaw-dropping stunts, dangling from skyscrapers, leaping across moving cars, defying gravity with comedic flair. But what the public never knew was that Lloyd did it all with a mangled hand and missing fingers. In 1919, a prop bomb exploded in his hand during a photo shoot, severing his thumb and index finger. Rather than retreat from the spotlight, Lloyd commissioned a custom prosthetic glove to hide the injury. The glove looked seamless on film but was stiff and painful in real life. His grip strength was compromised, making his daredevil feats even more dangerous. In safety, last he scaled a building with 3 working fingers and a concealed prosthetic, his life literally hanging by a thread. Lloyd's disability was a tightly guarded secret. Insurance companies refused to cover disabled performers, so disclosure meant financial ruin. Studios forbade photographs of him without the glove. Even off-set, Lloyd avoided handshakes, often keeping his right hand tucked away. His determination to keep performing wasn't just professional, it was personal. "Every time I dangle from something," he said, "I'm proving I'm still whole." Harold Lloyd didn't just act through disability. He redefined the limits of what disabled performers could do, while hiding the cost from a world not ready to accept it. Lionel Barrymore. Lionel Barrymore was one of the first actors to openly appear in a wheelchair on screen, but that wasn't always the plan. His mobility disability, caused by severe arthritis and a hip injury that never properly healed, was long concealed behind painful contraptions. In the early 1930s, MGM forced Barrymore to wear metal leg braces under his costumes to maintain the illusion of mobility. These braces cut into his skin and caused bleeding. He'd collapse in pain after scenes, only to be ordered back on set. When it became physically impossible to stand, MGM allowed him to remain in films, but at a reduced salary. His wheelchair use was finally incorporated into roles, often explained in scripts as the result of war wounds or accidents. Barrymore's most famous role, Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, was a turning point. His real-life wheelchair became part of the character, though it was used to underscore villainy, reinforcing a troubling trope that disability equaled cruelty. Still, Barrymore became a trailblazer. His continued presence on screen broke barriers, even as the industry tried to limit him. He showed that being seated didn't mean being sidelined. His talent couldn't be braced, hidden, or wheeled away. Loretta Young. Loretta Young embodied grace and modesty on screen, but behind the gowns and poise, she lived with a painful secret: spinal scoliosis, a curvature of the spine that caused chronic back pain and limited mobility. Her condition, likely developed during adolescence, made long hours on set nearly unbearable. She often wore tight corsets, not just for silhouette, but to support her weakening spine. Crew members later recalled how she would retreat between scenes to lie flat on the floor of her dressing room, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks as she waited for the pain to subside. Studio photographers were instructed to shoot her only from her good side. Costumers designed dresses with flowing fabric and specific draping to conceal the asymmetry in her posture. Despite this, Young maintained a demanding schedule. Her refusal to be seen as weak led to a reputation for perfectionism and stiffness, misinterpretations of her constant effort to hide something beyond her control. Her disability was never acknowledged during her lifetime. Only after her death did private journals reveal her nightly rituals of heat pads, braces, and prayer. What audiences saw was divine elegance. What they didn't see was the immense strength required just to stand. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was the face of fierce ambition, perfectly styled, immaculately poised, and entirely in control. But beneath her commanding presence was a lifetime struggle with foot deformities and leg asymmetry, the result of a childhood accident that never healed correctly. Crawford's feet were so disfigured, she wore custom-made shoes, sometimes with painful metal inserts that forced her toes into unnatural positions for red carpet events and dance scenes. Her walk, often praised for its power, was actually choreographed to minimize her limp, something directors carefully blocked out of frame. On set, Crawford insisted on low lighting near her legs, shooting from the waist up whenever possible. Her contract with MGM included a clause that no photos of her bare feet be taken, even at home. Every costume fitting was a carefully engineered deception, with heels modified to balance uneven leg length. Her discomfort made her notorious for demanding breaks between takes, but few realized it was because she was enduring relentless pain. She reportedly carried a small flask of whiskey not for rebellion, but to numb the throbbing in her legs when painkillers ran out. Crawford wasn't just fighting for fame. She was fighting to look unbreakable in an industry that treated brokenness as betrayal. Behind the glamour, every strut was a triumph of will over pain. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift was one of the most sensitive and soulful actors of his generation. His eyes held deep sadness, and now we know why. After a near-fatal car crash in 1956, Clift's once symmetrical face was left partially paralyzed, with extensive nerve damage and visible deformity. Studios immediately panicked. MGM wanted him pulled from Raintree County, claiming his face was no longer camera-worthy, but Elizabeth Taylor, his co-star and closest friend, threatened to walk unless he was allowed to finish. He did, but only after enduring grueling makeup sessions, lighting manipulation, and camera tricks to mask the damage. Clift became obsessed with hiding the left side of his face. Scenes were reshot dozens of times so the camera never caught the wrong angle. He practiced smiling in front of mirrors, trying to regain symmetry he would never fully recover. The physical damage compounded his emotional turmoil. Once a rising romantic lead, he became consumed with guilt and pain. Pills and alcohol followed, not from vanity, but from despair at a world that valued his beauty more than his soul. Despite this, he kept acting, brilliantly, but every performance after the accident was shadowed by the knowledge that Hollywood only tolerated his difference as long as it stayed hidden. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake's peekaboo hairstyle became one of the most iconic looks of the 1940s, but few knew it was more than a fashion statement. It was a deliberate disguise to hide a facial asymmetry caused by Bell's palsy. Lake developed partial facial paralysis during adolescence. Her left eye drooped slightly, and the muscles on one side of her face didn't move with the same precision as the other. This made symmetrical close-ups nearly impossible. A Paramount stylist discovered the solution by accident. Her long, wavy blonde hair strategically fell over her left eye. It created an air of mystery, seduction, and instantly caught on with fans. What was never mentioned publicly, that peekaboo wave wasn't just sexy, it was surgical. The studio reinforced the image relentlessly. They rejected roles that would require Lake to pull her hair back, and even forbade her from wearing hats or tying her hair in interviews. Behind the camera, however, Lake struggled. The long bangs impaired her vision, often requiring multiple takes. Crew members helped her hit marks by placing small tactile objects on the floor, and if humidity caused her hair to move, panic ensued on set. When the public grew tired of her image and the hairstyle faded in popularity, so did Lake's career. The industry had no interest in the woman behind the illusion. When she tried to return to acting later in life, she found no studio willing to hire a washed-up gimmick. What no one realized was that the gimmick had been armor, a way to survive a system that demanded flawlessness from a woman who had been flawed all along. John Garfield. John Garfield oozed blue-collar toughness and brooding masculinity in films like Body and Soul. But what audiences didn't know was that he was born with a heart defect so serious doctors once predicted he wouldn't live past adolescence. From childhood, Garfield experienced shortness of breath, dizziness, and fatigue, especially under stress. Yet he refused to let it stop him. He threw himself into theater, boxing, and eventually Hollywood. But behind the scenes, his condition was always a danger. During intense scenes, Garfield sometimes collapsed backstage. Directors chalked it up to overacting. In truth, his heart simply couldn't handle the strain. He kept nitroglycerin tablets in his pocket during shoots, using them discreetly between takes. Studios worried about insuring him, so Garfield was told never to speak of his condition. He agreed, because to be fragile in Hollywood was to be replaced. In his 30s, he was blacklisted during the Red Scare, not because of his health, but because of his leftist views. The stress pushed his already fragile heart to the brink. He died at 39, alone in a New York apartment. The press called it a mystery. Those who knew him called it inevitable. His heart, the one thing he could never show on screen, had finally given out. Helen Lamar. Helen Lamar was once dubbed the most beautiful woman in the world, a face so enchanting it graced every major magazine of the 1940s. But behind that beauty was a mind both brilliant and quietly neurodivergent. Though never officially diagnosed during her lifetime, Lamar displayed clear signs of what we would today understand as being on the autism spectrum. She struggled with eye contact, preferred silence over small talk, and had difficulty navigating social cues on studio lots. She was most comfortable in isolation, often retreating to her dressing room not to rest, but to invent. Yes, invent. During World War II, Lamar co-developed a frequency-hopping technology that later became the basis for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Studios had no interest in her scientific pursuits. They wanted her to smile, speak little, and remain stunning. Her awkwardness during interviews was interpreted as arrogance. Directors found her difficult because she'd fixate on illogical details in scripts or asked to reshoot scenes if her intonation felt off. These weren't demands. They were attempts to impose structure on a chaotic process. Rather than celebrate her intellect, Hollywood belittled it. She was offered fewer roles, labeled cold, and eventually forced out of the industry. The woman who helped invent the foundation of modern communication spent her final years in near obscurity. What the world missed was a woman who didn't just break the mold of beauty, she rebuilt it from the inside out, all while hiding the truth of how her remarkable brain really worked. Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton was one of the greatest character actors of his time, commanding, intelligent, and versatile. But off-screen, he carried a deeply personal burden tied to his physical appearance and suspected body dysmorphia. Laughton had a genetic skin condition, believed to be ichthyosis, which caused chronic flaking, scaling, and redness, especially on his face and hands. Combined with a naturally heavy frame, this led to constant ridicule in his youth and discomfort in adulthood. He became obsessive about lighting, angles, and makeup, often arguing with cinematographers to hide what he saw as grotesque imperfections. He insisted on multiple camera rehearsals, not for performance, but to study how his skin looked under each bulb. His wife, Elsa Lanchester, once admitted that mirrors had to be covered in their home during particularly severe flare-ups. Despite his talent, Laughton avoided romantic lead roles, believing audiences would never accept his face as desirable. He compensated by leaning into grotesque or villainous roles, Quasimodo, Captain Bligh, characters where his appearance could be masked as artistry. Yet privately, he longed to be seen differently. "They let me be a genius," he reportedly said, "but never just a man." His performances were masterclasses in depth, but they were also shields crafted to protect a self-image the studio system never allowed him to heal. Judy Holiday. Judy Holiday won an Academy Award for Born Yesterday, stunning audiences with her comedic timing and ditzy charm. But the truth was far more complex. Holiday battled undiagnosed dyslexia and auditory processing disorder, which made script reading and line memorization a daily struggle. In an industry obsessed with speed and precision, Holiday's need for repetition and slower rehearsal processes frustrated directors. She was labeled difficult and scatterbrained, an unfair misreading of someone coping with an invisible learning difference. To manage, Holiday developed elaborate mnemonic tricks. She'd tape lines in hidden places on set, behind props, inside handbags, and secretly rehearsed with assistants late into the night. Her perceived improvisation was often carefully rehearsed scripting based on memory aids, not spontaneity. In press interviews, she adopted the same comedic persona she played on screen, using it as camouflage. Audiences thought she was playing dumb to be funny, but really she was acting smart to survive. Her genius wasn't in being the ditz. It was in turning a disability into an unstoppable delivery system for laughter. And when Hollywood grew tired of her type, it discarded her, never recognizing the brilliant mind that had outwitted an unforgiving system. Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero will always be remembered for his flamboyant portrayal of the Joker on Batman and for his dashing, mustachioed roles in Hollywood's golden age. But beneath that suavity was a condition he fiercely concealed, a war injury that left him with a subtle but permanent limp. Romero served during World War II and reportedly suffered a shrapnel injury to his left leg. Though he recovered, the wound caused nerve damage and chronic stiffness. Rather than admit this to producers, who feared any hint of disability might limit romantic roles, Romero adapted. He learned to choreograph his movements so carefully that his limp became invisible to the untrained eye. Dance numbers were modified so he always turned with his stronger leg. Camera operators were instructed to favor side angles when he walked, and in some productions, he avoided full-body shots altogether. Despite the pain, Romero maintained his screen persona as a carefree Latin lover. Privately, however, he required nightly leg braces and occasional cortisone injections. The man who seemed to glide across ballrooms in Technicolor spent his evenings icing down his injury in silence. Romero was many things: actor, dancer, cultural icon, but above all, he was a master illusionist, transforming physical limitation into cinematic grace. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge broke barriers as the first Black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. But behind her meteoric rise was a cruelly hidden physical issue: chronic pelvic scarring and internal injuries caused by a botched back alley abortion forced on her early in her career. The procedure left her in constant pain, with complications that led to reproductive issues and occasional fainting spells. Studios blamed her exhaustion on nerves and instructed handlers to keep her away from gossip reporters when she appeared frail. Because she was a woman of color in an industry run by white men, Dandridge had zero room for perceived weakness. Her body was exoticized, fetishized, and commodified. Admitting she suffered would have destroyed the tightly controlled fantasy built around her. To compensate, she overprepared, memorizing entire scripts and rehearsing choreography alone in her room to ensure no one suspected anything. But pain, like truth, finds a way to surface. During a live performance in Las Vegas, she collapsed off stage. Doctors quietly administered morphine, and the press was told it was dehydration. Dandridge's secret scars weren't just physical, they were symbolic of how the system mutilated her soul while selling her body. Her brilliance burned bright, but always through agony. Frederick March. Frederick March was a two-time Oscar winner, hailed for his ability to embody vastly different characters, from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to the best years of our lives. But what few knew was that March himself lived a double life, hiding facial disfigurement from a World War I gas attack. March suffered partial facial nerve damage and scarring after being exposed to mustard gas. The wounds were repaired with primitive cosmetic surgery, but he was left with one side of his face slightly stiffer, a half smile he spent years perfecting in mirrors to appear natural. He wore specialized makeup in every film and often had lighting rigs custom built for his scenes. Cameramen were instructed never to shoot close-ups from the left unless absolutely necessary. His expressive restraint, widely praised by critics, was in part a necessity. Certain facial movements simply weren't possible. Despite this, March never stopped performing, but privately he remained haunted by his injury. He once remarked, "The war never leaves your face. You just learn to act around it." Frederick March was a master of transformation, but his greatest performance may have been hiding a past that tried to claim both his face and his future. They hid pain behind glamour, deformity behind poise. These stars weren't just icons. They were warriors in silence. Their resilience shaped Hollywood history in ways never seen. Now that the curtain's been lifted, we honor the truth they carried alone. Like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories behind the spotlight.